You know what? In my 80 years on this earth, I've witnessed a lot of history, wars, scandals, the rise and fall of presidents. But what happened yesterday in Washington, that shook me to my bones. I'm Robert De Niro, and I'm breaking decades of silence because sometimes you see something so extraordinary that staying quiet becomes complicity. Picture this, it's 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. The House chamber is buzzing with that familiar tension you feel before something big goes down. For months, we've been watching this administration steamroll over everything in their path. Executive orders flying like confetti, treating Congress like a suggestion box they can ignore when convenient. The latest power grab, a presidential decree stripping federal workers of their collective bargaining rights. Just like that. No debate, no discussion. These aren't faceless bureaucrats we're talking about. These are the people who make sure your veterans get their benefits, who inspect the food your kids eat, who show up when hurricanes devastate communities. And this president just told them they don't matter anymore. Now, I've played tough guys my whole career. I know bullies when I see them. And this was bullying, plain and simple. The kind that makes your blood boil because you know it's wrong, but you feel helpless to stop it. But then something impossible happened, something nobody saw coming. Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania stood up. This isn't some radical firebrand. This is a moderate Republican who spent years trying to find middle ground. But yesterday was different. Yesterday he looked at what was happening and said, no more. He wasn't alone. One by one, 19 other Republicans joined him, 20 total, 20 people who decided their conscience mattered more than their careers. They used something called a discharge petition. Sounds like Washington bureaucracy, but it's actually beautiful. It's democracy's nuclear option. When leadership tries to bury a bill, when they want to hide from a vote, rank and file members can force their hand. Speaker Johnson thought he had this locked down. He figured he could sit on the Protect America's Workforce Act forever, keep it buried in some committee, protect the president from an embarrassing defeat. Wrong. When that 218th signature hit the petition, when they reached the magic number needed, the chamber went dead silent. You could feel the shock waves. This wasn't supposed to happen, not in this political climate, not when both parties can't even agree on the weather, but it did happen, and I watched every second of it. Jared Golden from Maine, a Democrat, had started this whole thing months ago. He knew it was a long shot. The odds were stacked against him like a rigged casino game. But he also understood something fundamental. Working people don't care about party labels when they're struggling to pay rent. Golden had been quietly building this coalition, one conversation at a time. Republicans who were tired of being told what to think. Democrats who wanted action, not just rhetoric. People who remembered why they came to Washington in the first place. The moment Fitzpatrick crossed that aisle to sign the petition, his own colleagues started booing. Actually booing, like they were at a baseball game and their team just struck out. Can you imagine? Here's a man doing what he believes is right for his constituents, and his supposed allies are treating him like a traitor. I watched his face in that moment, no hesitation, no looking back over his shoulder for approval, just pure conviction. The kind of conviction I've spent my career trying to capture on screen, but here it was, happening in real life. Then came Jeff Van Drew from New Jersey. Then Chris Smith, then Tom Keene Jr. One by one, they walked down that aisle like they were walking into history. Each signature on that petition was like a gunshot in the silence of the chamber. But you know who was cheering? The federal workers watching from the gallery, the families who'd been going to bed every night wondering if their jobs would exist tomorrow, the people who actually keep this country running while politicians play games. I saw tears in some of those faces. Real tears, not the crocodile tears you see in political theater, but the genuine emotion of people who thought democracy had forgotten about them. And suddenly, there it was again, working for them instead of against them. Let me tell you what was happening behind the scenes, because this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. For weeks, Golden had been quietly meeting with moderate Republicans, coffee shops, private offices, anywhere they could talk without the cameras watching. He'd pull out his phone, show them pictures of federal workers from their own districts, Sarah from the VA office in Pennsylvania processing veteran claims, Mike from the National Weather Service in Florida tracking hurricanes that could save thousands of lives. These weren't abstract policy discussions anymore. These were real people with real faces and real families. That's when the magic happened. That's when politics became personal. I heard about one conversation Golden had with Fitzpatrick that changed everything. It was in Fitzpatrick's office late at night after the cameras had gone home. Golden asked him one simple question. What are you going to tell Sarah when she loses her voice at work? What are you going to tell her kids? Fitzpatrick went quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm going to tell them their congressman remembered who he works for. That's the moment this whole thing became inevitable. The White House reaction was swift and vicious. Within hours, they were calling these 20 Republicans enemies of the party. Enemies, because they stood up for working families. But here's where it gets really ugly. I've got sources who tell me the president was screaming at his staff, throwing papers around the Oval Office like a child having a tantrum. He couldn't understand how this happened, how his own party had turned against him. Get me Johnson on the phone, he was shouting. How does this happen? How do we lose 20 of our own people? When Johnson finally got the call, he couldn't explain it either, because you can't explain courage to a coward. You can't explain conscience to someone who's never had one. The pressure campaign started immediately. These 20 Republicans started getting calls from party leadership, from donors, from the White House itself, threats disguised as friendly advice, primary challengers being recruited in their districts, the full machinery of political intimidation grinding into action. But something beautiful happened. Instead of backing down, these representatives started talking to each other, group text messages flying back and forth. How are you holding up? We did the right thing. Stay strong. They'd created something the bullies couldn't break. Solidarity. I've seen this movie before. The powerful lashing out when they realize they're not as powerful as they thought. It's fear, pure and simple. For months, this administration had operated like they owned the place. Executive orders, bypassing Congress, acting like the other branches of government were just decorative. Yesterday, democracy reminded them who's really in charge. When you govern by intimidation, you're only as strong as people's fear. But when a group stands together, when they realize they have strength in numbers, you can't punish them all without destroying yourself. That's exactly what happened here. These 20 Republicans remembered something crucial. They represent their constituents, not the White House. Their oath was to the Constitution, not to any one man. The final vote was 231 to 195. The Protect America's Workforce Act passed. Federal workers got their collective bargaining rights back. David beat Goliath using nothing but courage and conscience. Speaker Johnson stood there looking like a man who just watched his house burn down while holding a bucket of water. His whole job is keeping his people in line, delivering votes when it matters. Yesterday, he couldn't have delivered a pizza, let alone the loyalty he promised the president. I watched him during the vote count, and you could see the exact moment he realized he'd lost control. His face went pale, his hands started shaking slightly. 23 years in politics, and he'd never been humiliated like this on live television. Later, reporters asked him how he let this happen. His answer? Sometimes democracy works in unexpected ways. Even in defeat, he couldn't admit the truth, that he'd forgotten what democracy actually means. But here's what really gets me fired up about all this. It's not just the politics, it's what it represents. For months, these federal employees had been going to work with knots in their stomachs, wondering if their years of service meant anything, feeling powerless while their rights got stripped away. I talked to Maria Gonzalez, a 15-year veteran of the Social Security Administration. She told me she'd been updating her resume, looking for private sector jobs, convinced her government career was over. When the vote passed, she called me crying, happy tears. I can stay, she kept saying. I can keep helping people. I can stay. That's what this victory really means. It's not about political scorekeeping. It's about dignity. It's about regular Americans knowing they still have a voice in their own government. Yesterday, they learned something beautiful. The system can still work when good people decide to make it work. I think about the characters I've played over the years, men who faced impossible odds, but found the courage to do what's right. Yesterday, I saw that kind of courage in real life, not on a movie set, but in the halls of Congress. 20 people decided their principles mattered more than their political futures. They showed the country what leadership actually looks like when it's not polluted by fear and ambition. And the ripple effects are already starting. I'm hearing from sources that moderate Republicans in other states are watching this closely. They're asking themselves, if these 20 can stand up, why can't I? That's how movements begin, not with grand speeches or campaign rallies, but with quiet moments of courage that inspire others to find their own. The president thought he could rule by decree, wave his hand like some kind of monarch, and make democracy disappear. Yesterday, Congress reminded him we have 3 branches of government for a reason. Nobody gets to be king in America. This story isn't over, it's just beginning. Because when people stand together against bullying, when they choose courage over comfort, change doesn't just become possible, it becomes inevitable. And that's why, at 80 years old, I finally decided to speak up.